The auction ground smelled of dust, sweat, and cheap liquor, a place where voices rose and fell with the rhythm of money-changing hands. People stood in loose circles, laughing too loudly, as if noise could drown out the unease that hung in the air. When she was pushed forward, the sound around her faded. She straightened her back and lifted her chin, refusing to look small. Her wrists were bound, but her eyes were sharp, scanning faces, measuring threats, memorizing exits. She had learned long ago that fear was a luxury she could not afford. The auctioneer barely looked at her before calling out the opening price. A few men glanced up, judged her quickly, and looked away. She was not fragile enough to inspire pity, nor broken enough to seem controllable. The numbers dropped fast. Each lower bid felt like an insult, but she did not flinch. When the price fell to $2, laughter rippled through the crowd. That was when she heard a calm voice cut through the noise. $2. She turned sharply. The man who had spoken stood apart from the others, weather-worn and quiet, his hat pulled low. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply waited. The gavel struck, final and unforgiving. The sound echoed in her chest. As they removed her bindings and motioned her forward, anger surged hotter than fear. She stepped toward him on her own, eyes blazing. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I won't obey." The crowd hushed, waiting for his reaction. He studied her for a moment, as if weighing something unseen. "I didn't buy obedience," he said evenly. "I bought time." The words unsettled her. Cruel men bragged. Weak men threatened. This man did neither. They rode out of the auction grounds as the sun dipped low, painting the land in harsh gold. She counted the turns, watched the horizon, noted the way he held the reins. Every detail mattered. Escape was not a question of if, but when. She tested the ropes, shifted her weight, listening for opportunity. "You think this ends with you owning me?" she said quietly. "I think this ends with you alive," he replied. She said nothing after that, but her resolve hardened. Whatever his intentions were, she would not surrender her will. If he thought $2 could buy her silence, her spirit, or her future, then he truly did not know who he had just taken from that auction ground. The ranch appeared at the edge of the plains as the sky darkened. A low cluster of buildings crouched against the wind. She expected fences lined with guards, locked doors, and orders barked like commands to a dog. Instead, there was only quiet. The horse slowed on its own, and the man dismounted without a word, cutting her bindings with a knife and stepping back as if to prove a point. Freedom that comes too easily is never free, she thought. He handed her water first, then bread. She did not thank him. She watched his hands instead, calloused but steady, always careful to keep space between them. When he motioned toward the small cabin, she stayed where she was. Defiance had kept her alive before. She trusted it more than kindness. "You expect me to work for you?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I expect you to decide," he replied. "Food doesn't appear on its own." She laughed bitterly. "So it is control." "No," he said, meeting her gaze. "It's survival." The days that followed confused her more than the auction ever had. He gave her real tasks, mending, hauling water, tending animals, but never watched her closely. When she worked slowly, he said nothing. When she refused outright, he shrugged and did the work himself. There were no threats, no raised fists, no reminders of what he had paid. That silence unsettled her. She had learned how to fight cruelty, how to endure it. She did not know how to respond to restraint. At night, she lay awake listening to the wind tear across the land, measuring the distance to the hills, the direction of the stars. She could run. She told herself this again and again, yet each morning she stayed, telling herself it was only until she was strong enough, only until she had a better plan. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, she finally challenged him. "You think pretending not to own me makes this different?" she said. "You paid for me. I paid to remove you. From a place where you would disappear," he answered quietly. "What you do after that is yours." The words struck deeper than she expected. She wanted to call him a liar, to accuse him of playing a longer game. Instead, she turned away, angry at herself for hesitating. Power always demanded a price. She was certain of that. If this man was patient, it was only because he expected payment later. And when that moment came, she promised herself, She would be ready to fight him just as fiercely as she had fought everyone else. The storm came without warning, rolling across the plains like a living thing. The wind howled through the ranch, rattling doors and snapping loose boards, and she felt the tension settle deep in her chest. Storms brought cover, confusion, and opportunity. She had almost decided this would be the night she left when the horses grew restless and the dogs began to bark. Men appeared out of the dark, their silhouettes sharp against flashes of lightning, armed, confident. They moved like people who believed. They still had a claim. Her heart pounded as recognition hit her harder than fear. These were not strangers. They were part of the chain she thought she had escaped. "They're here for me," she said, her voice low but urgent. The rancher was already moving, calm despite the chaos. "Then stay behind me," he said, loading his rifle with deliberate care. She stared at him. "They'll kill you." "They won't," he replied. "They don't want witnesses." The men shouted demands over the wind, calling her property, calling him a thief. Rage burned through her, hot and blinding. She stepped forward despite herself. "I am not going back," she yelled into the storm. A shot rang out, splintering wood near her head. Before she could react, the rancher pulled her down and returned fire, forcing the men to scatter. The fight was brief but brutal, thunder masking gunshots, rain swallowing blood into the dirt. When it ended, the men retreated into the darkness, leaving silence behind like a held breath finally released. She stood shaking, rain plastering her hair to her face. "You knew this would happen," she accused. "I hoped it wouldn't," he said, "but I was prepared if it did." "Why?" she demanded. "Why risk your life for someone you paid $2 for?" He met her eyes, exhausted but steady. "Because no one should be reduced to a price." The words broke something open inside her. Not trust. Trust was too fragile for that, but certainty. The certainty that every hand reached out only to take. She looked at the ranch, the open land, the broken fence he still meant to repair. Nothing here forced her to stay. When the storm faded, he cut the last reminder of her past from her wrists and stepped back. "You can leave at sunrise," he said. "No one will stop you." She nodded slowly. "I still won't obey you." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I wouldn't want you to." As dawn crept over the plains, she realized the choice was finally hers. Not bought, not stolen. And whatever she decided next, it would be on her own terms.